My name is Randy, 67 years old now, a retired farmer who sold everything my family built for generations so my adopted son Jacob could attend Princeton. Last summer, he and his wealthy wife kicked me out of their Hamptons home for embarrassing her friends. Standing in their manicured driveway with just my suitcase, Jacob sneered, "You are not even my real father. Do not be so dramatic." I walked away without looking back. Before I tell you how I turned this heartbreak into the sweetest justice, let me know where you are watching from and hit that subscribe button if you have ever had to teach someone a lesson about gratitude. I was born and raised in rural Wisconsin, just outside a small town called Millfield that most folks have never heard of. My parents owned a modest dairy farm that had been in our family since my great-grandfather purchased the land back in 1920. Growing up, I learned the value of hard work, waking before sunrise to help with morning chores before school. The farm was never going to make us rich, but it provided a good, honest living. When I turned 23, I married my high school sweetheart, Martha. She was the prettiest girl in Millfield, with honey blonde hair and a smile that could brighten even the darkest Wisconsin winter day. We were young and in love, excited to build our life together on the family farm after my parents retired to Florida. Martha and I dreamed of filling our farmhouse with children who would grow up loving the land just as I had. But life had different plans for us. After 5 years of trying to conceive, doctors confirmed what we had begun to fear. Martha had a condition that made it nearly impossible for her to bear children. The news devastated us both. For months, Martha would cry herself to sleep while I held her, feeling helpless and unsure how to mend her broken heart. Then, one Saturday in autumn, we attended the annual Millfield Harvest Festival. Martha was volunteering at the bake sale booth when I noticed a thin, solemn-faced boy watching her from a distance. He stood apart from the other children, his too large second-hand coat hanging off his small frame. A harried-looking woman, clearly not his mother, occasionally glanced his way while managing 3 other children. "That is Jacob," the school principal told me when she noticed my attention. 8 years old, been in foster care since he was 4. Bright kid, but troubled. His 4th placement this year. Something about the boy watching my wife with such intensity struck a chord in me. Later that day, I mentioned him to Martha, and I saw a spark in her eyes I had not seen since the doctor delivered the bad news. We contacted social services the following Monday. The process was far more complex than either of us imagined. There were mountains of paperwork, background checks, home studies, and interviews. Jacob had a history of behavioral issues stemming from early childhood trauma. His biological mother had been a drug addict who lost custody when neighbors found Jacob alone in their apartment for 3 days. His father was unknown. Despite the challenges ahead, Martha and I were determined. 6 months later, Jacob came to live with us on a trial basis. Those first few months tested us in ways we never expected. Jacob had nightmares that would wake him screaming in the middle of the night. He hoarded food in his room, not trusting that meals would always be available. Some days, he would refuse to speak entirely. Other days, he would lash out in rage, breaking things and screaming that he hated us. Martha and I agreed from the beginning that patience would be our most important tool. We never raised our voices in response to his outbursts. We never punished him for his fear behaviors. Instead, we maintained consistent routines so he could learn to feel secure. Each night, no matter what kind of day we had, we told him the same thing. "We are here. We are not going anywhere. You are safe now." The first time Jacob called me Dad was nearly a year after he came to live with us. I was teaching him how to drive the tractor, something he had been begging to learn for months. He was sitting on my lap, his small hands on the wheel under mine, his face serious with concentration. When we successfully completed a turn without hitting the fence, his face broke into a rare smile. "Did you see that, Dad?" he said, the words slipping out so naturally that I do not think he even noticed. But I noticed. I had to turn my face away so he would not see the tears in my eyes. Farm life seemed to provide exactly what Jacob needed. The physical work gave him a healthy outlet for his emotions. The routine of seasonal planting and harvesting taught him patience and the rewards of perseverance. Caring for animals showed him how to be gentle and responsible. Little by little, the angry, frightened boy began to transform. When Jacob turned 15, our family faced another challenge. Martha began forgetting things. At first, it was small things, a grocery list, where she put her glasses. But soon, it became clear something was seriously wrong. The diagnosis was early-onset Alzheimer's disease. At 45, my beautiful Martha was facing a battle we could not win. As Martha's condition deteriorated, I became both mother and father to Jacob. I learned to cook Martha's recipes, to help with homework, to listen to teenage problems. Jacob, showing maturity beyond his years, stepped up to help care for the woman who had become his mother. He would sit and read to her for hours, even when she could no longer remember his name. Despite the challenges at home, Jacob thrived academically. His teachers started suggesting he consider college, something no one in my family had ever done. When his SAT scores came back near perfect, his guidance counselor called me in for a meeting. "Jacob has extraordinary potential," she told me. "With his grades and scores, he could apply to Ivy League schools." The idea seemed impossible. Farmers did not send their kids to places like Harvard or Yale. But Jacob's eyes lit up at the possibility, and I found I could not say no to that look. His high school graduation was one of the proudest days of my life. Jacob was valedictorian, standing tall in his cap and gown as he delivered a speech about resilience and second chances. Martha was in a wheelchair by then, her mind mostly gone, but I like to think she understood what a special day it was. 2 weeks after graduation, Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep. Jacob and I held each other and grieved for the woman who had made us a family. With Martha gone, we were all each other had left in the world, or so I thought at the time. When the acceptance letter from Princeton arrived, Jacob was ecstatic. I pretended to be too, hiding my anxiety about the cost. The financial aid package was generous, covering about 70% of the expenses, but the remaining 30% might as well have been $1 million to a dairy farmer from Wisconsin. I sat at our kitchen table late into the night, going over the numbers again and again. There was no way the farm income could cover the costs, not with Martha's medical bills still piling up. I considered loans, but the interest rates would have been crushing. There seemed to be only one solution, though it broke my heart to consider it. The farm had been in my family for 4 generations. Every tree, every field, even the creek that ran through the back pasture held memories. It was where I had grown up, where I had planned to grow old. But what good was holding on to land if it meant denying Jacob the future he deserved? I contacted a real estate agent the next day, swearing her to secrecy. I did not want Jacob to know what I was planning. He would have refused to go to Princeton if he knew the cost. The property should have fetched a good price, but I needed a quick sale before the first tuition payment was due. The buyer, a corporate farming operation, knew I was desperate and offered 30% below market value with a fast closing. The day I signed the papers, I felt like I was betraying my ancestors. But then I thought of Jacob and how far he had come from that solemn-faced 8-year-old at the harvest festival. Some sacrifices were worth making. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment for rent in New Jersey, about 30 minutes from Princeton. It was nothing like our spacious farmhouse, but it would allow me to be close enough to visit Jacob while he attended school. To make ends meet, I took a job as a night security guard at a warehouse and picked up weekend handyman work. At first, Jacob called or visited regularly. He would tell me about his classes, his professors, the amazing library where he spent most of his time. But as his first semester progressed, the calls became less frequent. When he did call, there was a subtle change in his voice, a different cadence to his speech. During his first visit home for Thanksgiving, I noticed other changes. His Wisconsin accent had softened, replaced by something more neutral. His flannel shirts and jeans had been exchanged for khakis and button-downs. He used words I had to ask him to explain. None of these things bothered me on their own, but together they felt like the first warning signs that Jacob was drifting toward a world I could not follow. I tried to stay connected by sending care packages, just as Martha would have done, homemade cookies, family photos, silly gifts to make him laugh. My letters were never as eloquent as I wanted them to be, my hands more comfortable with farm tools than pens. But I wrote faithfully every week. During Jacob's sophomore year, I saved up enough to surprise him for his birthday. I drove straight from my night shift, still in my security guard uniform, excited to take him to breakfast. When I arrived at his dorm, the look on his face was not the joy I had anticipated, but something closer to embarrassment. He introduced me to his roommate as Randy, not my dad, and hurried me away from campus to a diner where, he assured me, no one from school ever goes. It was during Jacob's junior year that he met Alexis. She came from old money in Connecticut, her father a prominent investment banker, her mother on the board of several prestigious cultural institutions. The first time Jacob mentioned her name, his voice changed, becoming softer, almost reverential. When I finally met her during Parents' Weekend, I understood why. Alexis was beautiful in that effortless way of the very wealthy. Her dark hair sleek, her clothes simple but clearly expensive. She extended her hand to me with practiced politeness, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "So wonderful to finally meet you, Mr. Wilson," she said, using my surname in a way that immediately established distance between us. The dinner that followed was excruciating. Alexis spoke about summer homes and European vacations, charity galas and family connections. Each time I tried to join the conversation, sharing stories from the farm or asking questions about her background, her smile would tighten almost imperceptibly before she redirected the conversation. Jacob watched her with adoration, laughing too loudly at her jokes, touching her arm at every opportunity. When I mentioned a funny story from his childhood, he quickly interrupted, changing the subject. It was as if he was ashamed of his past, of me. The real eye-opener came when I overheard Jacob talking to a group of Alexis's friends at a campus coffee shop the next day. They did not see me enter, sitting in a corner booth. "Your dad seems nice," one of the young men said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "Oh, Randy? He is just a family friend who helped out after my parents died," Jacob replied smoothly. "My father was actually a professor of agricultural economics at Wisconsin. Died when I was in high school. Heart attack." I sat frozen in my seat, coffee cooling between my hands, as Jacob spun an elaborate fiction about his background. In his new version, he had grown up on a gentleman's farm, not a working dairy. His mother had been a concert pianist, not a farmer's wife who died of early-onset Alzheimer's. By the time he finished, there was nothing recognizable left of our life together, nothing left of me. I should have confronted him, should have walked over and exposed his lies. But something stopped me, some deep, aching need to protect him even from the consequences of his own actions. So I slipped out unnoticed, drove back to my apartment, and cried for the first time since Martha died. Despite the growing distance between us, I continued to support Jacob in every way I could. I worked extra shifts to send him spending money. I attended every parent function, sitting alone while Jacob circulated among Alexis's family and friends. I cheered the loudest at his graduation, though he barely acknowledged my presence, too busy posing for photos with Alexis's extended family. I told myself it was just a phase, that once he was out of college and established in his career, he would remember who he was and where he came from. But as I watched him accept his diploma, his arm around Alexis's waist, I felt a cold certainty that the boy I had raised was gone forever. After graduation, Jacob accepted a position at Alexis's father's investment firm in New York City. The starting salary was more than I had ever made in my best years on the farm. He moved into a luxury apartment in Manhattan that Alexis's parents owned as an investment property, paying them what he called a family rate for rent. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The diamond on Alexis's finger cost more than my car. Wedding planning immediately consumed their lives, or more accurately, consumed the lives of Alexis and her mother. Jacob called less and less frequently, always sounding rushed when he did, always having to jump on another call after just a few minutes. The wedding was set for the following June at the Briarcliff Country Club in Connecticut. When I received the formal invitation, I noticed it was addressed to Randy Wilson, not dad or even father of the groom. Still, I was determined to be there for Jacob's big day, to celebrate this milestone, even if it took him further from me. I wanted to contribute something meaningful to the wedding, knowing I could not match the financial contributions of Alexis's family. I offered to build the arch they would stand under for the ceremony, something handcrafted with care. Alexis's mother quickly dismissed the idea. "Oh, that is very sweet. But we have already contracted with a premier floral designer from New York," she explained, patting my arm as if I were a child. "Perhaps you could just sign the guest book when you arrive?" The wedding weekend arrived, and I checked into the only motel I could afford within 20 miles of the venue. My suit, purchased specifically for the occasion, was the most expensive clothing I had ever owned, though I knew it would pale in comparison to what the other guests would wear. At the rehearsal dinner, I discovered I had been seated at what one server discreetly called the miscellaneous relatives table, far from the main wedding party. My table mates included a second cousin Alexis had never met, the elderly aunt of a bridesmaid, and the teenage son of Alexis's father's business partner. While waiting in line for the bathroom, I overheard Alexis talking to her bridesmaids in the hallway. "No, that older man in the blue suit," she was saying. "He is just Jacob's adoptive father, not actually family. We had to invite him, obviously, but do try to keep him away from my grandmother. You know how she gets confused easily." I stepped back around the corner, my face burning with humiliation. For the rest of the evening, I stayed in my seat, speaking only when spoken to, counting the minutes until I could leave without seeming rude. The wedding itself was extravagant beyond anything I had ever witnessed. Thousands of flowers, a 10-piece orchestra, food and wine that must have cost more than a year's salary from my security job. During the ceremony, I sat alone, watching the son I had raised promise his life to a woman who saw me as an embarrassing footnote in his story. Jacob's wedding speech thanked Alexis's parents for their generosity and support. He spoke about how they had welcomed him into their family, how they had shown him what success and class truly meant. Not once did he mention me, or Martha, or the farm, or any part of the life that had brought him to this moment. After the wedding, Jacob and Alexis moved into a penthouse apartment in an exclusive building overlooking Central Park. The few times I visited, I felt like an intruder in a museum, afraid to sit on the pristine white furniture or touch the expensive art pieces that decorated their walls. Jacob's career at his father-in-law's firm advanced rapidly. Each time we spoke, he had a new title, a larger office, more people reporting to him. He began to talk about markets and investments, using financial terminology I could not follow. When I asked simple questions, trying to understand his work, he would sigh with thinly veiled impatience before giving oversimplified explanations. Meanwhile, I continued working my security and handyman jobs, each year finding it harder to make ends meet as my rent increased, but my income did not. I developed arthritis in my hands, making the manual labor more painful, but I could not afford to retire. I had used all my savings and the proceeds from the farm sale for Jacob's education. When I turned 65, I hoped Jacob might remember my birthday. I waited all day for his call, but it never came. 3 days later, he sent a text message. "Sorry, been swamped with work. Happy belated. We'll call soon." He did not call. A month later, he did phone, his voice excited in a way I had not heard for years. "Dad, we are having a baby," he announced, momentarily forgetting to call me Randy as he had taken to doing. "Alexis is 3 months along, due in February." Despite everything, joy surged through me. A grandchild, another chance at family. Perhaps this baby would bridge the growing chasm between Jacob and me. "That is wonderful news, son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I cannot wait to meet my grandchild." There was a pause on the line. "Right. Well, it is very early days yet. Alexis is being very careful about who we tell. Her parents are thrilled, of course. They are already talking about preschool applications. Sophia Elizabeth Harrington Wilson was born on February 12th. I learned of her birth not from Jacob, but from a mass email announcement sent to what appeared to be their entire contact list. The professional photos attached showed a beaming Jacob and serene Alexis holding a tiny pink bundle. Alexis's parents stood proudly beside them. There was no mention of when I might be permitted to meet my granddaughter. When Sophia was 3 months old, I sent a package of gifts. A handmade wooden music box I had crafted during evening hours after work. A soft blanket I had commissioned from a local quilter, patterned with farm animals in memory of Jacob's childhood home. A silver rattle I had stretched my budget to purchase. 2 weeks later, I received a polite thank you note signed by both Jacob and Alexis. 6 months after that, when I finally visited their home, I noticed none of my gifts were visible anywhere in the nursery. When I asked about the music box specifically, Jacob looked uncomfortable. "Oh, I think the nanny might have put it in storage," he said vaguely. Alexis read that wooden toys can harbor bacteria. Later that same visit, I overheard the nanny telling another staff member that the grandmother keeps sending these lovely organic baby clothes, but Mrs. Wilson regifts them to the doorman's family. It took me a moment to realize the grandmother referred to Alexis's mother, not to Martha. In their household narrative, Martha had been erased entirely, and I was barely a footnote. As Jacob's success in the financial world grew, so did the distance between us. He was featured in business magazines as a rising star. Their social media showed a perfect family attending galas and vacationing in exclusive resorts. Meanwhile, I worked night shifts watching an empty warehouse and spent weekends fixing leaky faucets for extra cash. My calls to Jacob increasingly going to voicemail. 3 summers after Sophia was born, I received an unexpected phone call from Jacob. "Dad," he said, surprising me by using the term, "we have got this place in the Hamptons for the summer. Alexis thought it might be nice if you came to stay for a week. Sophia is talking now, and well, she should know her grandfather." The invitation left me speechless with joy. After years of feeling like an afterthought in Jacob's life, here was a genuine attempt to include me. I immediately requested time off from both my jobs, spending money I could not really spare on new clothes for the visit. Jacob gave me an address and told me to take the train to Southampton, promising someone would pick me up at the station. I spent the 3-hour journey from New York in a state of nervous excitement, rehearsing stories I could tell Sophia, imagining walks on the beach with my granddaughter's small hand in mine. When the train pulled into Southampton, I collected my single suitcase and stood on the platform, scanning the faces for Jacob, or perhaps a driver he had sent. After 30 minutes, when the platform had emptied and no one had appeared, I called Jacob's cell phone. "Oh, shoot," he said, sounding distracted. "I completely forgot. Alexis had this last-minute lunch thing, and I had to take a work call. Can you just grab a cab? The address is 24 Dune Road. We will reimburse you." The cab fare to their summer rental cost nearly $80, more than I usually allowed myself for a week's worth of groceries. The house, when we finally arrived, was a sprawling modern structure of glass and steel perched on a dune overlooking the Atlantic. A uniformed housekeeper answered the door, looking surprised to see me. "Mr. Wilson is on a conference call, and Mrs. Wilson is not back from lunch yet," she informed me after I explained who I was. "I will show you to your room." My room turned out to be a small space off the kitchen that I suspected normally housed staff. I could hear the dishwasher through one wall and the laundry room through another. Still, I was determined to make the best of the situation. I was here to see Sophia, after all. Jacob appeared briefly that evening, apologizing for his absence but explaining he had fires to put out at work and would have to take calls most of the evening. Alexis returned after Sophia's bedtime, offering a cool cheek for me to kiss before retreating to what she called the master wing. It was not until breakfast the next morning that I understood the real reason for my invitation. Alexis's regular nanny had a family emergency and had left for the week. The replacement agency could not send someone until the following Monday. They needed someone to watch Sophia while they maintained their busy social calendar. "You will be doing us such a favor," Alexis said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sophia adores you, of course, and this way you get quality time with her." I swallowed my disappointment and agreed. Spending time with my granddaughter was why I had come, after all. And despite the circumstances, the next few days with Sophia were precious. She was a bright, curious 3-year-old, with Jacob's quick intelligence and Alexis's striking dark hair. She showed no sign of the behavioral issues that had plagued Jacob at her age. But I recognized his laugh in hers, the same way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. On Thursday evening, I was giving Sophia her bath when Alexis burst into the bathroom, clearly agitated. "I completely forgot we are hosting dinner tonight," she said, more to herself than to me. "The Blakemores and the Suttons. 8 people total." "That is no problem," I assured her. "Sophia and I can have dinner in the kitchen." Alexis bit her lip, looking uncomfortable. "Actually, Randy, would you mind terribly keeping Sophia in your room after her bedtime? These are important clients of Jacob's father, and well, we are trying to make a certain impression." The meaning was clear. I was the help, not family, and my presence would undermine the image they wanted to project. "Of course," I said quietly, focusing on rinsing shampoo from Sophia's hair to hide the hurt in my eyes. Later, after putting Sophia to bed in a portable crib they had set up in my small room, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. The only one available was down the hall, past the dining room where Alexis was entertaining her guests. I tried to slip by unnoticed, but just as I passed the open doorway, Sophia woke and called out for me. "Grandpa, want water, Grandpa?" 8 heads turned simultaneously to stare at me, standing awkwardly in the hallway in my worn jeans and flannel shirt. I saw the looks exchanged between the expensively dressed guests, the slight raising of eyebrows, the barely concealed disdain. "Sorry to interrupt," I mumbled, hurrying back to quiet Sophia. When I emerged again, Alexis was waiting in the hallway, her face tight with anger. "Could you please not wander around when we have guests?" she hissed. "And for God's sake, change out of those clothes. You look like the maintenance man." I spent the rest of the evening confined to my room with Sophia, listening to the laughter and conversation from the dining room, feeling like an intruder in the house where my son lived. The next morning at breakfast, Alexis did not bother to hide her irritation. "Do you know what Diana Blakemore asked me last night?" she said to Jacob while I sat silently at the far end of the table. "She asked if you had hired your contractor as a charity case. She thought Randy was someone we had hired to do renovations who we were letting stay in the house." Jacob shot me an annoyed glance, as if her humiliation was somehow my fault. "I had to explain that he was your adoptive father," Alexis continued, "which then led to this whole awkward conversation about your background." "I am sorry about that," I said quietly. "I did not mean to embarrass you." "It is not about embarrassment," Alexis snapped. "It is about appropriateness. Jacob has worked very hard to build the right connections for his career. These people are not just friends. They are potential investors, partners, references. Impressions matter." That night I could not sleep, hurt, and anger keeping me awake. Around midnight, I got up to get a glass of water. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Jacob and Alexis talking in low voices. "We need to discuss the Randy situation," Alexis was saying. "He clearly is not comfortable in this environment. Have you considered that he might be better suited to a retirement community? Somewhere with people more like him?" "He cannot afford to retire," Jacob replied. "You know that." "Well, we could help, obviously. A small place in Wisconsin, perhaps, near where you grew up, or Florida, where the other old people go. Somewhere far from New York and the Hamptons, at any rate." I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to believe what I was hearing. They were discussing my life, my future, as if I were a problem to be solved, rather than a person with feelings and agency. "I will talk to him," Jacob sighed. "But not this trip. Let us just get through the next few days." I retreated to my room, a sick feeling in my stomach. The next morning I rose early and was sitting on the deck with coffee when Alexis came out in her workout clothes. "Oh, Randy, I am glad to find you alone," she said, her voice artificially bright. I hope you were not upset by anything you might have overheard last night." Before I could respond that I had indeed overheard their conversation, she continued, "It is just that Jacob and I have been concerned about you. Working 2 jobs at your age cannot be good for your health. We think it might be time for you to consider other options." "What other options would those be?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "There are some lovely retirement communities that cater to people of modest means," she said, as if offering me a wonderful gift. "We would be happy to help you find something suitable." While she spoke, I noticed her eyes scanning my appearance with the same critical assessment she might give a piece of furniture that no longer matched her decor. I was suddenly acutely aware of my weathered skin, my calloused hands, my white hair, all the physical signs of a life of physical labor, so different from their world of offices and cocktail parties. Later that day, looking for a book to read to Sophia, I opened the drawer of a side table and found a brochure for Silver Pines Assisted Living, a facility in rural Wisconsin. Several pages were marked with sticky notes in Alexis's handwriting. Most affordable option and no wait list, immediate availability. They had been planning this before I even arrived. The invitation had never been about reconnecting or letting Sophia know her grandfather. It had been about removing me from their lives in a way that would not make Jacob feel guilty. That night, I discovered they had gone even further in their plans. When I went to retrieve my phone charger from my suitcase, I found my belongings had been moved and the suitcase partially repacked. Someone had been through my things, assessing what I owned, perhaps even deciding what I should take to this retirement home they had chosen for me. The violation of privacy was the final straw. After putting Sophia to bed, I sat awake in the dark, formulating what I would say to Jacob in the morning. I found Jacob alone in the kitchen early the next morning, checking emails on his laptop. Alexis had already left for her Pilates class, and Sophia was still asleep. "We need to talk," I said without preamble. Jacob glanced up, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "Can it wait?" "I have got a client situation brewing." "No, it cannot wait. Someone went through my personal belongings yesterday, and I found the brochures for that assisted living facility in Wisconsin." Jacob had the grace to look uncomfortable. He closed his laptop and sighed. "Look, Dad, we were going to discuss this with you properly. Alexis just thought it would be good to do some research first." "Research about my life? Without consulting me? And going through my private things?" "Do not be so dramatic," Jacob said, his tone dismissive. "Alexis was just tidying up and happened to notice how worn some of your clothes are. We are concerned about you, that is all. Concerned enough to pick out a retirement home 4 states away without even asking what I might want?" Jacob's expression hardened. "Frankly, Dad, you have not exactly made the best decisions for yourself. You are 67 years old, working as a night watchman and handyman. Your apartment is tiny and in a questionable neighborhood. You have no retirement savings. What exactly is your plan?" His condescension sparked something in me, a slow, burning anger that had been building for years. "My plan was to live out my days on the family farm that had been in our family for generations," I said evenly. "But I sold that farm so you could go to Princeton, so you could have the opportunities I never had." "Here we go again," Jacob rolled his eyes. "The martyr routine. Yes, you sold the farm. Yes, you helped with college. That is what parents do, Dad. They sacrifice for their children. You do not get a lifetime medal for doing what any decent parent would do." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. In his mind, selling my family legacy, working 2 jobs in my 60s, sacrificing everything I had, was just the basic expectation of parenthood. Nothing special, nothing worth ongoing gratitude. Before I could respond, Alexis walked in, her face flushed from exercise. "What is going on?" she asked, looking between us. "Randy found the Silver Pines brochure," Jacob said. "Oh." She had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "I was going to discuss that with you properly, Randy. It really does look like a nice place. Very affordable. And very far from New York," I noted. "Very far from my granddaughter." Alexis's expression cooled. Let us be honest here. How often do you really see Sophia anyway? 2, 3 times a year? And Wisconsin is where you are from. We thought you would be more comfortable there, with your own kind of people. My own kind of people? I repeated slowly. You know what I mean, she said, waving a hand, dismissively. Regular folks. Not everyone is suited to our lifestyle, Randy, and that is perfectly fine. But you have to admit, you do not exactly fit in with our social circle. As you made abundantly clear at your dinner party, I said. See? This is exactly the problem. Alexis's voice rose slightly. You take everything so personally. It was not about you. It was about maintaining certain professional appearances that are crucial for Jacob's career. And I am bad for appearances, I stated flatly. Well, if you would at least try to adapt, she began, but Jacob interrupted. Enough, both of you. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Dad, the point is, we think it would be better for everyone if you had a more sustainable living situation. We have given this a lot of thought. Without once asking what I might want, I pointed out. Because you are not realistic about your situation, Jacob said. Look, we are willing to help financially, set you up somewhere nice, make sure you are taken care of, like an obligation to be managed, I said quietly. Not like family. Alexis made an exasperated sound. God, you are impossible. We are trying to help you, and you turn it into this whole emotional drama. This is exactly why it is so difficult having you around. Everything becomes this big production about your feelings. Something in me snapped. Years of swallowed hurt, of making excuses for Jacob's behavior, of telling myself that blood did not matter, and he was still my son despite how he treated me. All of it crystallized into a clarity I had been avoiding. I sold my family's farm for you, I said, my voice low but intense. I worked 2 jobs for years to help support you. I gave up everything so you could have the education and opportunities I never had. And this is how you repay that? By treating me like an embarrassing problem to be hidden away? We have given you more than enough, Jacob said coldly. It is time you stop depending on us and figure out your own life. Depending on you? I almost laughed. When have I ever asked you for anything? When have I ever been a burden to you, except in your imagination and Alexis's social calculations? Oh, please, Alexis cut in. The constant guilt trips about the farm, as if Jacob forced you to sell it. That was your choice. A choice I made out of love for my son, I said. Something you clearly cannot understand. Do not speak to my wife that way, Jacob warned. I am simply stating facts, I replied. I loved you enough to give up everything for your future. You cannot even tolerate my presence for a week without planning how to ship me off to some cut-rate retirement home. You are not the saint you think you are, Jacob said, his face flushing with anger. You chose to adopt me, remember? I never asked for that. I never asked to be your charity project. The words hit me like a physical blow. Is that what you think you were to me? A charity project? What else would you call it? You and Martha could not have kids of your own, so you picked up a damaged one from foster care to make yourselves feel better. Congratulations on your good deed. I thought of Martha, of how she had loved Jacob with every fiber of her being, of how she had sat by his bed during nightmares, had celebrated every small victory, had believed in him when no one else did. The dismissal of her love as mere charity was too much to bear. Your mother would be heartbroken to hear you speak this way, I said quietly. It was the wrong thing to say. Jacob's face contorted with rage. Do not bring her into this, he snarled. She has been gone for 15 years, and she is not even relevant to this conversation. How can you say that? She loved you more than anything in this world. Enough! Jacob slammed his hand on the counter. This is exactly what I am talking about. Every conversation becomes this manipulative trip down memory lane. I have my own life now, my own family. I do not need you trying to drag me back to some idealized version of the past that probably never even existed. Alexis placed a hand on Jacob's arm, her expression one of exaggerated concern. Jacob, darling, Remember your blood pressure. This is not worth getting upset over. She turned to me, her voice dropping to a tone one might use with a disobedient child. I think it would be best if you left today, Randy. This visit clearly is not working out. We can discuss the retirement options over the phone in a few weeks, when everyone has calmed down. I am not going to any retirement home of your choosing, I stated firmly. I may not be rich, but I am perfectly capable of managing my own life without your intervention. Fine, Jacob snapped. Then manage it. But do it somewhere else. I think we all need some space right now. Are you asking me to leave? I asked, disbelief coloring my voice. I am telling you to leave, Jacob replied coldly. Today. Now, in fact, there is a train back to the city at 11:30. I suggest you be on it. I stared at my son, searching his face for any sign of the boy I had raised, any flicker of the bond we had once shared. There was nothing there but cold irritation and embarrassment. Can I at least say goodbye to Sophia? I asked quietly. Alexis glanced at her watch. She has a playdate in 20 minutes. It would just upset her to see you, and then have to leave right away. Better to make a clean break. A clean break. As if I were a bad habit Jacob needed to quit, not his father of almost 30 years. I see, I said, my voice barely audible. Then I will get my things. I returned to the small room off the kitchen and methodically packed my suitcase, fighting to keep my hands steady. As I zipped it closed, I heard the house phone ring and Alexis answer it. Yes, this is Mrs. Wilson, she said. There was a pause. Oh dear, that is awkward. We actually have a situation here with a family guest who has overstayed his welcome. Would it be possible to have someone come out? Just as a precaution. She was calling security on me, treating me like a trespasser or a threat. The final humiliation. I carried my suitcase to the front door, where Jacob was waiting, his expression stony. Alexis called the community security, he informed me. They will be here to escort you to the train station. You think I need to be escorted off the property? I asked, incredulous. That I might what? Make a scene? Refuse to leave? Jacob shrugged uncomfortably. It is just procedure for the community. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, I repeated. That seems to be the theme here. We stood in uncomfortable silence until a security vehicle pulled into the driveway. I could see neighbors watching from their windows and porches, no doubt wondering what drama was unfolding at the Wilson summer rental. As the security guard approached, Jacob handed me an envelope. For the train ticket and a cab when you get back to the city, he explained, not meeting my eyes. I stared at the envelope, then back at him. Keep your money, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I managed before you came into my life, and I will manage now. I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the security vehicle. Jacob called after me, his voice suddenly uncertain. Dad, come on. Do not be so dramatic. This is not forever, just until we all cool down. I turned back to look at him, standing in the doorway of his rented luxury home, the son I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything for. You are not even my real father, he said, his tone dismissive. Do not be so dramatic. The words cut deeper than any knife could have. I turned away without responding and continued walking. The security guard, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation, opened the car door for me. You okay, sir? He asked quietly as I settled into the seat. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. As we drove away, I did not look back at the house or at Jacob, still watching from the doorway. I did not want my last memory of him to be standing there, embarrassed by me in front of his wealthy neighbors. Instead, I closed my eyes and remembered the 8-year-old boy on my lap in the tractor, turning to me with shining eyes and calling me Dad for the first time. That was the son I had loved. That was the son I had lost. The train ride back to New York was a blur. I sat staring out the window, replaying the morning's confrontation over and over, each remembered word another knife in my heart. By the time I reached my small apartment in Queens, emotional exhaustion had given way to a numbness that was almost a relief. For 3 days, I barely left my bed. I called in sick to both my jobs, something I had never done before. I did not eat. I did not answer my phone. I simply lay there, trying to understand how my life had come to this point, trying to reconcile the smiling boy in my memories with the cold stranger who had cast me out of his home. On the fourth day, hunger finally drove me to the kitchen. As I made a simple sandwich, I caught sight of my reflection in the window above the sink. I barely recognized the defeated old man staring back at me, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow with grief. "Enough," I said aloud to the empty apartment. "Enough feeling sorry for yourself, Randy." That afternoon, I began the process of sorting through my belongings, a task I had been putting off for years. Most of it was junk, if I was honest with myself. Outdated clothes, paperbacks with broken spines, kitchen gadgets I never used. But in the back of my closet, I found a box I had not opened since moving to New York nearly 25 years earlier. Inside were the papers from the farm sale, along with other documents from my Wisconsin life. Birth certificates, Martha's death certificate, the adoption papers for Jacob, property deeds, tax records, and, buried at the bottom, the original contract for the sale of the farm. I had signed those papers in such a rush, desperate to get the money in time for Jacob's first tuition payment. Now, reading through the legal language more carefully, something caught my eye. There was a clause I had completely forgotten about, something the buyer had insisted on, and I had agreed to without much thought. The clause stated that the corporate entity purchasing the farm was required to maintain it as agricultural land for a minimum of 20 years. If they converted more than 10% of the acreage to non-agricultural use within that time frame, the original owner had the right to repurchase the property at the original sale price plus inflation. I frowned, trying to remember what had happened to the farm after I sold it. I had deliberately avoided driving past it whenever I visited Wisconsin, the pain of seeing it in someone else's hands too great to bear. But now I wondered what had become of my family's land. The next morning, I called an old friend from Millfield, Tom Grayson, who had gone to law school and opened a small practice in our hometown. We had fallen out of touch over the years, exchanging only Christmas cards and the occasional email. But he answered my call immediately, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "Randy Wilson, as I live and breathe. How the heck are you, old friend?" I explained my situation. First, the painful estrangement from Jacob, then my discovery of the contractual clause. "Interesting," Tom said when I finished. "Very interesting indeed. Send me a copy of that contract, and I will look into what has happened with the property." 2 weeks later, Tom called back with surprising news. The corporate farming operation had sold the land to a developer 3 years earlier. The developer had begun construction on a small subdivision, converting about 15% of the farm to residential use. "They are in clear violation of the clause," Tom confirmed. "You have grounds to enforce the repurchase option." "But I do not have that kind of money," I pointed out. "Even at the original sale price, it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Let me look into some options," Tom said. "And Randy, there is something else you should know. I did some digging into Jacob's situation while I was at it." "What about Jacob?" I asked, surprised. "Well, it seems he has been telling people you are deceased. I found an interview he gave to some financial magazine where he talks about being orphaned at 18 and putting himself through Princeton. The news should have hurt, but I was beyond that now. What else did you find?" "He has been using your social security number on certain documents. Not identity theft exactly, but there are some financial transactions where he claimed to be acting as your proxy. Given what you have told me about your estrangement, I doubt you authorized those." My mind reeled. Jacob had been pretending I was dead, using my identity for financial transactions? The son I had raised would never have done such things. But then, the son I had raised seemed to have disappeared long ago. Tom continued his investigation over the next few weeks, uncovering more troubling information. Jacob's firm, it turned out, was under preliminary investigation by the SEC for certain trading practices. Nothing public yet, but there were whispers of impropriety, of corners cut and rules bent. "I am not saying Jacob is directly involved," Tom cautioned, "but given his position there, he would be caught in the fallout if anything goes public." I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the documents Tom had sent me, trying to make sense of it all. The farm I had sold for Jacob's education could potentially be mine again. The son who had rejected me was building his life on a foundation of lies and possibly financial misconduct. It was as if the universe was offering me a strange form of justice, a chance to reclaim what was lost while Jacob's carefully constructed facade threatened to crumble. But did I want justice? Revenge? The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was simply to be treated with respect and love by the son I had raised. My thoughts were interrupted by a call from Tom. "Randy, I just met with the current owner of your old farm," he said without preamble. "He is in financial trouble, overextended himself with the development. When I mentioned the contract violation and your repurchase right, he practically begged for a way out. He would sell it back to you in a heartbeat if you could come up with the money." "Which I cannot," I reminded him. "That is the thing." Tom's voice held an excited edge. "There have been surveys done on the property recently. Did you know there are natural gas deposits under the northeast section? Significant ones, according to the geological reports." "Natural gas?" I repeated, stunned. "On my family's farm? The reports indicate it could be worth millions in extraction rights," Tom confirmed. "The current owner either does not know or has not had the capital to pursue it. But Randy, this changes everything. We could secure a loan based on the potential mineral rights, buy back the farm at the contract price, then either develop the gas deposits ourselves or sell the rights for a substantial profit." My head spun with the implications. The land that had been in my family for generations, that I had sold to give Jacob a future, might now be worth far more than I had ever imagined. And through a series of chances and overlooked contract clauses, it could be mine again. Over the next month, Tom and I developed a careful, three-part plan. First, we secured a loan based on the potential value of the mineral rights, enough to exercise my repurchase option on the farm. Second, we set up a trust for Sophia that would provide for her education and future needs, completely separate from Jacob and Alexis's control. And third, most difficult for me emotionally, we prepared a complete record of Jacob's misrepresentations and unauthorized use of my identity, not for legal action, but as leverage if needed. I was careful not to act from anger or a desire for revenge. This was about justice, about securing my future, and about creating something positive from the ruins of my relationship with Jacob. If he had built his life on lies, that was his choice. I would rebuild mine on truth. As we were finalizing the paperwork for the farm repurchase, an interesting development occurred. The financial news reported that the SEC had launched a formal investigation into several investment firms, including the one where Jacob worked. The report mentioned questionable trading practices and potential misrepresentation to clients. That evening, for the first time in months, Jacob called me. "Dad," he said, his voice tight with stress. "How are you?" "I am well," I replied neutrally. "And you?" "Dealing with some work stuff," he said vaguely. "Listen, I have been thinking about our last conversation, and I feel bad about how things ended. I may have been a bit harsh." "A bit harsh," I repeated, thinking of being escorted from his property by security while neighbors watched. "We were all emotional," he continued, either missing or ignoring my tone. "Alexis and I have discussed it, and we think maybe we approached the whole retirement community thing wrong. We should have included you in the process more." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Months of silence after throwing me out, and now he wanted to revisit the retirement home discussion. But there was something in his voice beyond the usual condescension. Fear, perhaps. Uncertainty. "Jacob," I said carefully, "is everything all right with your firm? I saw something on the news about an SEC investigation." There was a long pause. "It is nothing to worry about," he finally said. "Just routine regulatory stuff. But actually, I was thinking of coming to visit you next week." There are some financial matters we should probably discuss in person. Now I understood. With his firm under investigation, Jacob suddenly needed me, or more specifically, needed to ensure I would not complicate his situation. He had no idea I already knew about his misuse of my identity, his claims that I was deceased. That would be fine, I said, keeping my voice even. I have some news of my own to share. After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment, looking around at the modest space where I had lived for so many years, while Jacob enjoyed the privileges my sacrifice had helped provide. Soon, very soon, everything would change. Not because I sought revenge, but because justice sometimes arrives in unexpected ways, and because I had finally found the strength to value myself as much as I had once valued him. Jacob arrived at my apartment the following Tuesday afternoon, looking nothing like the confident financial executive I had last seen in the Hamptons. His designer suit was slightly rumpled, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he had the tense, hypervigilant expression of someone expecting bad news from every direction. "Dad," he said, embracing me awkwardly. "Good to see you." I gestured him to the worn couch in my small living room. "Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "Water is fine," he said, glancing around the apartment with poorly disguised distaste. I had never been embarrassed by my modest living situation before, but seeing it through Jacob's critical eyes made me newly aware of the peeling paint, the mismatched furniture, the general shabbiness that had been my reality while he lived in luxury. "So," I said, handing him a glass of water and taking a seat opposite him. "You mentioned financial matters to discuss." Jacob shifted uncomfortably. "Yes. Well, there is this regulatory situation at work. Nothing serious," he added quickly, "but the SEC is requiring all executives to provide extensive documentation of our personal finances, family connections, that sort of thing." "I see," I said, waiting. "The thing is," he continued, "not quite meeting my eyes. There might be some paperwork where I listed you as deceased. For tax purposes," he added hurriedly. "It was a technical thing, really. An accountant's suggestion. You told people I was dead," I stated flatly. He flinched slightly. "Not people, exactly. Just on some forms. And there might be some accounts where I listed myself as having your power of attorney. Again, just technical details to streamline some investments. Investments using my Social Security number," I clarified, "without my knowledge or consent." Jacob's head snapped up, surprise and alarm crossing his face. "How did you know about that?" "I have been doing some investigating of my own," I said calmly, "with the help of an old friend who happens to be an attorney." The color drained from Jacob's face. "Dad, I can explain. It was just a way to minimize some tax liabilities. Nothing illegal, really. And the investments benefited both of us." "Did they? I do not recall seeing any of the proceeds." "Well, I was planning to use them for your retirement," he stammered. "That is partly what the whole retirement community discussion was about, setting you up comfortably with those funds." The lie was so transparent, so desperately constructed on the spot, that I almost pitied him. Almost. "Jacob," I said quietly, "I know about the farm." He blinked, confused. "The farm? What about it?" "The clause in the original sale contract. The violation by the current owner. The natural gas deposits." His expression went from confusion to shock. "Natural gas? On the old farm? Worth millions in extraction rights, according to geological surveys," I confirmed. "Surveys that were done after you told me I needed to consider a retirement home because I could not afford to stop working." Jacob seemed to shrink into himself, his carefully constructed world of lies and manipulations beginning to crumble before his eyes. "Dad, whatever you are thinking, let me explain." "There is no need," I interrupted gently. "I have exercised my right to repurchase the farm. The paperwork was finalized yesterday." "You bought back the farm?" he asked incredulously. "How could you possibly afford that?" "A loan based on the mineral rights," I explained. The same rights that would have been discovered years ago if the corporate buyer had properly developed the land as an agricultural property, as required by the contract. Jacob stared at me, speechless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. I continued in the same calm, measured tone. I have also established a trust for Sophia. Her education, her future needs, all provided for, regardless of what happens with your firm's current legal troubles. The trust is structured so that neither you nor Alexis can access the funds. They are solely for Sophia's benefit. You did what? His voice rose sharply. You had no right to make financial decisions involving my daughter. I had every right as her grandfather, I replied firmly. Just as I had every right to know you were using my identity for financial transactions. Just as I had every right to be treated with basic human respect in your home, rather than being humiliated and discarded when I became inconvenient. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely gone. What do you want from me? Money? Is that what this is about? Because if you think you can blackmail me with this information while my firm is under investigation, you are making a serious mistake. I shook my head, saddened but not surprised by his assumption. I do not want your money, Jacob. I never did. What I wanted was to be treated like your father, not an embarrassing obligation to be managed and hidden away. Then what do you want? He demanded. I am moving back to Wisconsin next week, I told him. Back to the farm. I am going to build a new life there, reconnect with the community, maybe even grow some crops again, though on a smaller scale than before. Fine, he said bitterly. Go back to your precious farm. What does that have to do with me? Nothing, unless you want it to, I said simply. I am not seeking revenge, Jacob. I am seeking peace. If you want to be part of my life going forward, you are welcome to be, but on different terms. Honesty, respect, basic human decency. And if I refuse these terms, he challenged, though with less conviction than before, then you continue on your path, and I on mine, I said. But you should know that I have documented every instance where you misrepresented me as deceased or used my identity without authorization. I have no intention of reporting these things to the authorities, but the documentation exists. Jacob's face paled again. That sounds like a threat. It is a fact, I corrected. One you should be aware of as you navigate your current professional challenges. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of truth heavy between us. Finally, Jacob spoke, his voice smaller than I had heard it in years. I do not know why I did those things, he said. Any of them. The lies about my background, pretending you were dead, treating you the way I did at the house. It just seemed easier than explaining, than acknowledging where I came from. Where you came from was a home with two parents who loved you, I reminded him gently. Who wanted the best for you? Who sacrificed to give you opportunities? I know, he whispered, and for the first time in our conversation, I glimpsed the shadow of the boy I had raised. I know that, Dad. 2 months later, I was settled into a rental house in Millfield, while construction began on a new, smaller home on the farm property. I had decided to preserve the original farmhouse as a guest house, a piece of family history to be maintained rather than replaced. The news about the natural gas deposits had been confirmed by further testing, and several energy companies were bidding for extraction rights. The numbers being discussed were staggering, more money than I had ever imagined possessing. But the true wealth, I was discovering, was in reconnecting with the community I had left behind, in being welcomed back by old friends, in rediscovering the rhythms of small-town life. I had been in Wisconsin for about 3 months, when a car I did not recognize pulled into my driveway one Saturday morning. To my surprise, Jacob stepped out, alone, dressed in jeans and a casual shirt rather than his usual designer suits. Dad, he said hesitantly, standing by his car. I hope it is okay that I came. I should have called first. It is okay, I assured him, gesturing toward the porch. Would you like some coffee? We sat in rocking chairs overlooking the fields that had once been my family's livelihood and would soon be again, though in a different way than my ancestors could have imagined. Jacob told me about the changes in his life since our last meeting. His firm had settled with the SEC for a substantial fine. He had resigned his position and was considering starting his own smaller investment advisory company, one focused on ethical practices and transparency. "And Alexis?" I asked. He smiled ruefully. "Adjusting to a significant lifestyle downgrade. We have sold the penthouse, most of the art collection, kept the house in Connecticut because her parents own it anyway. She is trying, though, taking cooking classes, looking into teaching positions at private schools." "And Sophia?" I asked, my voice softening at the thought of my granddaughter. For the first time, Jacob's smile reached his eyes. "She asks about you, wants to know when she can visit Grandpa's farm. She is welcome any time," I said sincerely. "And so are you, Jacob. Not as the person you pretended to be all these years, but as the person you truly are. My son." He looked away, blinking rapidly. "I do not deserve that title. Not after everything. Family is not about deserving," I told him. "It is about belonging, about choosing to love each other despite our flaws and failures. Your mother taught me that, and it is the one lesson I hope I can still teach you." Over the following year, Jacob visited regularly, sometimes with Sophia, occasionally with Alexis, who maintained a cool politeness that was a vast improvement over her previous contempt. I kept my distance, allowing Jacob to rebuild our relationship at his own pace, to find his way back to authenticity without pressure or expectation. The farm flourished under new management, the natural gas rights providing financial security I had never imagined possible. I established a scholarship foundation for foster children, hoping to give other kids like Jacob had once been a chance at higher education. The first recipient was a 16-year-old girl who had been in 7 foster homes, but maintained a 4.0 GPA, despite her challenging circumstances. The healing process was not linear. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to re-emerge, when Jacob's carefully constructed facade would slip back into place. But each time, we found our way back to honesty, to the imperfect but genuine connection that was slowly replacing the illusion we had both maintained for too long. What surprised me most about this journey was how it changed me. I had spent decades defining myself primarily as Jacob's father, measuring my worth by his success and his approval. Reclaiming the farm, standing up for myself, building a new life independent of his validation, had taught me about my own strength, my own worth. I had learned to value myself as much as I had once valued him, and paradoxically, that self-respect had created the foundation for a healthier relationship between us. On my 70th birthday, Jacob brought Sophia to the farm for a weekend visit. We sat on the porch of my new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks over fields that were truly mine again. "Grandpa," Sophia asked, her 7-year-old curiosity boundless, "were you sad when you had to sell the farm the first time?" I glanced at Jacob, who nodded slightly, encouraging me to answer honestly. "Yes, sweetheart, I was," I told her. "But I sold it so your dad could go to a very good school and have opportunities I never had. And now, many years later, I have it back again. Sometimes life works in circles like that." "And are you happy now?" she pressed, with the directness only children possess. I looked around at the land my ancestors had farmed, at the new house built with my own preferences in mind, at my son sitting beside me without pretense or performance for the first time in decades, and at my granddaughter, the future of our imperfect but healing family. "Yes, Sophia," I said truthfully. "I am very happy now." That night, after putting Sophia to bed, Jacob and I sat on the porch again, the summer air warm around us, fireflies blinking in the gathering darkness. "I have been thinking about what you said," Jacob spoke quietly, "about family being about belonging, not deserving, about choosing to love despite flaws and failures. Your mother's wisdom, not mine," I reminded him. "Maybe," he acknowledged. "But you lived it. When I was that angry foster kid breaking everything in sight. When I was that entitled college student embarrassed by your work clothes. When I was that ruthless businessman who cared more about appearances than people. Through all of that, you never stopped loving me, even when I gave you every reason to. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, words unnecessary between us in that moment of understanding. The peace I found in returning to my roots came not from regaining the farm, nor from the financial security the natural gas rights provided, but from reclaiming my sense of self-worth. I had lost everything, only to gain something far more valuable: the knowledge that love does not require perfection, that forgiveness does not erase consequences, and that sometimes the longest journey leads us right back where we started, but with new eyes to see the value of what was there all along. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone you loved? Has someone ever betrayed your trust and kindness? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, or made you think about your own family relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of life's difficult lessons. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to walk away, and sometimes the greatest gift is knowing when to return. Thank you for listening, and may your own journey bring you the peace you deserve.